Hey everybody, welcome back to the PD Rest channel. Today we're going to take a look at the ARCA Menards car around Richmond. Can be a bit of a tricky track, but probably one of the most rewarding to get right. Yeah, and you feel like you're on the edge when you're really cranking out good laps. So, going to take a look here at the track map, and you can see very small track. Um, Short track, but still wide enough, but it's not really all usable. There's not really much of a high line. It's mostly trying to get the car around the bottom side as quick as you can, and a lot of your passes are going to be made by capitalizing on mistakes or people missing the bottom or you getting the run out of a corner and trying to get the bottom of the lane. So talk a little bit about the behavior of the car into the corners. So your braking zones into turn one, the car is always going to feel a bit loose and that it wants to come around on you. And it'll feel that way until you let off the brakes and kind of get the car settled down into the corner. Then in the middle, it's going to feel like it tightens up and doesn't want to roll too well. And then when you get back to the throttle, the car is going to rotate and it's going to go back to feeling a little bit loose. So it's an odd set of feelings through that corner. So it kind of starts off loose, tightens up a little bit, almost to a point of being relatively neutral, and then it gets loose again off of the corner. Going into turn three, you'll experience the car feel a little bit loose, but shortly after that, it'll feel like it wants to go straight up the track and it doesn't want to turn. And you'll have to get back to the throttle to help that car rotate around, and then it's going to feel pretty loose all the way out of four on up until the front stretch. And that feeling's just going to get more and more pronounced the longer that a run goes on. So I'd say the exit of turn four gets probably the most difficult because if you burn off that right rear tire, it's really tough to put the power down and not spin out. You're going to see a lot of people this week that just overcook it a little bit, trying to come out of the corner, and they're going to turn themselves around. And in a similar way to Rockingham, turns one and two are kind of a later apex corner. As you get right about to the middle of turn one, that corner is going to feel like it tightens up. And if you look at the map here, you can see why. Going into turn one, you have this nice arc that you can get through, and then turn two kind of tightens up when it gets down to that back straightaway. So you'll make that a little bit of a late apex corner. And then in turn three, I always tell people you turn in a little bit sooner than you think you will, because you can get the car loaded up into that corner, and then it kind of hooks around the bottom line of the track, and that's going to be about the fastest way around. If you overcook it into that corner, the car kind of slides up and you lose the nose, and then you're kind of chasing after it there for a little bit. Another thing I wanted to show this week is the setups options that you have in the garage. Even though this is a fixed setup, we still have the option to change a couple things. The adjustments with the arrows on either side of them, those are things that you can change. Everything else you're not able to change. It doesn't have the little adjustment arrows next to it. So here in the garage, you can see you can make adjustments to steering ratio, steering offset, and your front brake bias. Now, steering ratio and front brake bias is something that we talk about quite a bit. I've never really touched on steering offset because I never mess with it. But basically what it does is allow you to recenter the steering wheel. So as you know, a lot of these oval cars, when you're going straight down the track, the steering wheel might be pointed to the right just a little bit. Some people don't like that. They prefer for it to be completely straight if the car's traveling straight, which is understandable. And so you use the steering offset to dial that out to your preference. As far as I know, it doesn't make um, any difference to how the car handles. I don't think it adjusts anything on how the car gets into the corner or anything like that. It's more of just a personal preference type thing. And you have to always check this before you do a race because since it's a fixed setup, you can't save what you decided. So you might have to write it down somewhere or remember it. And you'll see at the top, right under garage, where it says modified from. That's what you're going to want to look for If it doesn't say that, if it says identical to, then it's just the regular default setup. That said though, here is my steering ratio and brake bias configuration. I like the 12 to 1 because this is a track where you kind of need to turn in quickly and really be on your toes. And I like that 12 to 1 because I can get the car turned and rotated how I like. The front brake bias I've set to 65. I find it easier to get into the corner. If it's any further back, for me, I tend to lose the back of the car because I tend to carry the brakes into the corner. If you're not somebody that rides the brakes deep into the corner, then you could probably take it back a little bit more. But I am, so I have to adjust for that. It might not necessarily be the fastest thing, but it's a hell of a lot quicker than me being in the wall. And that kind of brings me to another point as well. This is another track where most people's race pace is going to be slower than their qualifying time. So even if you qualify maybe midfield or top 5, you're not completely out of the running yet because the drivers are not going to be pushing the car that fast every lap. If they are, they're going to burn their stuff up and you're going to get right by them anyway. But I've usually found here if I'm maybe 3 to 4 tenths slower than the pole sitter, I still have a fighting chance in the race because I can match that driver's race pace. They're just doing something in qualifying and getting a little extra out of the car that I'm not able to get. But that's the beauty of racing, is that you can make up for it in other ways. So that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the qualifying lap, and then we'll discuss it afterwards. And coming across the line to set a 22.043. That lap felt pretty good because I had to work for that one. So taking our more in-depth look, we'll see we do our usual line where at tracks like this we run the top side to carry as much momentum and drive out of this corner as we can so that we can cross the start-finish line and start our qualifying lap as fast as possible. So there's a lot happening here, so I wanted to slow this entire section down. So on the wall we see these white marks. The second to the last one right there is where we start our braking. So we let off the gas, we get on the brakes with about maybe 25% pressure, and the car kind of starts hooking itself a little bit to the left. And you could see that we don't really start turning in until we're into the corner. So the whole rear of the car is kind of unsteady, and I'm letting it ride around basically on that knife edge of spinning out before I start adding steering. So I don't add the steering back in until I feel the car settle down into the corner. Then we start trying to drive our way out and we try to get that later apex down in the bottom of the track so we can get pointed out for this area properly. We'll watch it again in real time, but also take note of the brake pressure. You see that as we're coming off the brake pressure, we're gradual. We're not really coming off of it really fast. That'll upset the car balance. And what happens is all that weight that you loaded onto the two front tires by braking, you unload it too fast and it all shifts backwards. And then you don't have enough grip in the front tires to carry that corner speed and the car just kind of wants to understeer, and that's where you can kind of lose the nose and start sliding up towards the wall, and then you're adding more steering coming out of the corner, which makes the car want to snap more on the exit. Now for this corner, what you're going to look for, you'll start your turn in just past this Xfinity sign that we're going to pass. You'll turn the wheel in and the whole rear of the car feels like it wants to come around. So you straighten up the steering wheel and kind of let that inertia carry you into the corner. And you also start your braking and you ease back out of the brakes like you do in turn 1. And you'll kind of feel the steering wheel will kind of get a little bit lighter and then it'll get heavy again. And that's when the car loads up into the corner. So I like to point it in a little earlier than a lot of people do because you kind of feel it's almost like if you're going over an intersection and it's got the big crown on the road that you're going to go over. It's like that where the car kind of lightens up and then it hunkers down and settles into the back into the road, that's kind of what we're doing by turning in when we are. You'll feel the car kind of drive off and then settle in, and that's when you want to start turning in real heavy. And then as for applying the throttle back, you be gentle. You can get a pretty good amount of throttle going. You just don't want to slide that right rear tire and start burning it up. So we'll watch it back here again in real time, but pay attention to how we talked about turning in, and you'll see that. And then again, carrying the throttle out of the corner. Um, you don't want the RPMs to start climbing without you building any speed, because that's how you know you're just building the heat in the tire. We got a little bit loose coming out of there. So how to save your tires throughout this run, just don't really drive too deep into the corner. And one of the mistakes that I typically make is that as the car starts falling off, I get impatient with the car, so I try to hurry it through the corner. So I tend to add a little bit more brake pressure as I'm about to start my turn in, and all that does is add more heat to those front tires and makes them worse. So just be patient on the brakes and patient with the car. Head into the corner with a decent amount of speed, but just wait on the car to do what you're asking it to do. Remember, these are big, heavy boats trying to get around a small track. For coming out of the corner, like we talked about just a second ago, just listen for the RPMs. If you're coming off the corner and that RPM starts building a little bit too quick and you're not building speed that fast, then that right rear tire, or both rear tires, are pretty much just spinning and getting hot and wearing out. Tire fall off here is a pretty big deal, so even if people are a little bit quicker than you on the start of the race, there is a good chance that they won't be able to carry that pace through the entire race, and you'll be able to make ground on them by keeping your tires cool and keeping them as healthy as possible. In turns 1 and 2, if you carry the brakes too deep down into turn 1, so if you start braking at the right point, or if you start braking a little bit too late and you have to get on the brakes a little extra, the car is going to get extremely loose. So that's how you know you should probably back up your braking zone a little bit. If you get back to the throttle too aggressively and too hard, coming out of turn 2, then it seems like sometimes the car wants to snap loose, sometimes it wants to go straight into the wall, so just be aware on that. And if that's the case, just gently start applying the throttle and don't really stab back at it. And if you overdrive turn 3, which I just did right there, then you'll notice the nose of the car just kind of slides on through the corner up towards the wall. And it's difficult to get a good corner once that happens, because you have to wait on the car to start cooperating again. And you can, if you're comfortable with doing this, if you do kind of miss that entry into turn 3, you can kind of be aggressive with the throttle and boot it just a little bit to get the back of the car to start to rotate again, and then play with the throttle from there and get an okay drive out and not lose as much time. Because if you do miss that corner and try to get back to the gas like you normally would, then there's a much better chance of it riding up towards the wall and smacking the wall. And as we've said, coming out of turn 4, it's going to get pretty loose later on in the run. Kind of that upper lane seems like the car wants to snap loose as you kind of cross up into that upper lane on the front stretch, so be aware of that as well. You can also dial your brake bias back throughout the run if the car feels like it's getting too tight. I did that in this race. I didn't do it a whole lot. I think I started with the 65% brake bias, and throughout the whole race only dialed it back 1 degree because that's all I was comfortable with. You might be comfortable with more, you might be comfortable with less. Just play around with it and see. Don't be afraid to experiment in the races. There's always another hour. So there we have it. That's the ARCA guide for Richmond this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some more tricks for the track. And I just, again, want to say thank you so much for all the support. This past week, has been really cool because I've gotten a chance to chat with a lot more of you in the comments and hear more of your racing stories. A lot of you are new. Some of you have been racing for a while and trying asphalt ovals. And I'm glad that you found the channel, and I'm glad that you're finding it helpful. There's going to be a lot of you in the coming months that probably learn things that I don't know and end up being faster than me. So if you like, feel free to share those, because I still want this to be a place where we all help each other out. Because if you're like me, you just enjoy talking shop about racing, and this is a place where you can do that. So, thanks again, everybody, and I hope you all have a great night, have a good race week, and I will see you all in the next video. Side note, I absolutely love watching replays here because I love watching the cars' suspension shift and move while they're going down the track. Reminds me of the old days.